Sorry, that time that's just a sticky mute button. Corey, I believe your slide sharing, so if you want to get ready, we'll kick right off at 10 past. And for externals who are still here, I'm just going to share the very brief feedback form that if you're able to fill in after the presentation, a few checkboxes I mentioned to you, we'd really appreciate that. Otherwise, in a minute, we will kick right off. And also, just as Kestrel mentioned, whenever a group is presenting, if the rest of the audience could turn cameras off just to protect bandwidth, that'd be really appreciated. So, Carbon, take it away.
Hi guys, we are Carbon, and our chosen problem statement is: how can we bridge the racialised wealth gap in the UK whilst balancing people, profits and planet? So when approaching this problem initially, admittedly, we were a bit overwhelmed. We struggled to stop ourselves from trying to solve the racial wealth gap entirely. And we think it's this tricky distinction is what has partly caused the stagnation in efforts to bridge the gap thus far, as well as the complexity of the problem itself. We think this framing of the problem as a complex problem makes it seem as if sort of every avenue you try and go down is already blocked off. So we try to detach ourselves from this idea of complexity whilst at the same time acknowledging its importance. We see this lack of progression in areas like ethnicity, pay transparency, where attempts to pass forward-thinking legislation have been unsuccessful. We were keen not to succumb to this almost sort of defeatist mindset, and so chose to break down the problem statement, trying to define all the key ideas of it. So firstly, the idea of defining race we deem to be quite unhelpful, as it's a hotly contested topic, and so instead decided to focus on the idea of racialised groups, which we have defined as socially constructed identities whose supposedly inherited common physical traits are used to impose social, political and economic costs. Secondly, we focused on the phrasing of the wealth gap. We phrase this as a measure of inequalities in tangible and intangible net assets. In addition, we felt it really important to constantly be checking our own white privilege as a group, and to understand the problem we are dealing with is actually a lived experience for the racialised group that we are aiming to help, and not merely just an intellectual problem. So with all this in mind, we are aiming to pair a big picture social change proposal through an awareness campaign and a more concrete midterm solution in a sustainable renovation project focusing on bringing revenue into marginalised communities. So Eva is now going to introduce the awareness campaign.
So our first approach concerns bringing awareness to the racialised wealth gap. This has been studied by experts much better equipped than us, and you could say that the solutions required to tackle it already exist. But the issue that we face is implementing these in our contemporary UK context. And it's kind of two-pronged. Firstly, the political climate is very reluctant to acknowledge the racialised wealth gap as we've conceptualised it. This was made really clear in the Racial Commission report released earlier this year, which says that while racism and racial injustice still exist, we no longer see a Britain where the system is deliberately rigged against ethnic minorities. And then the other half of the issue is that democratic involvement and widespread political consciousness in the UK is quite stagnant. We don't vote very rarely. There isn't often any meaningful political engagement in the general public. And as such, the government kind of gets away with neglecting to pay any attention to this issue, as the public, through no fault of their own, is generally not aware enough to hold them accountable. So we feel the priority isn't necessarily generating new solutions, but rather creating windows of change. And so a short-term solution that we can implement ASAP is us proposing an awareness campaign, which will educate the public and generate this political pressure we really need. And we're optimistic this will work in the current climate of COVID and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, because we see a general public that's particularly receptive to these changes. And so we propose that Algebra do a 7-day media blitz consisting of one cohesive image that could be plastered all over social media and posters, projections onto Parliament. And you can see a mock-up of this, what this campaign could potentially look like on our slides. This particular design is good to be understood by a large, quite diverse audience, because we've got a wide range of languages on it. You're encouraged to follow a link on the poster to a dedicated page on Algebra's website, which explains both the racialised wealth gap and the campaign in further detail. And this campaign kind of sets the stage and fits hand in hand with the other half of the scheme, which Maisie will now introduce.
So our second proposal is addressing the generational wealth dimension of the racialised wealth gap through a home ownership scheme for racialised groups. But we would first like to recognise that while our proposal focuses on solving wealth inequalities through home ownership schemes, previous programmes of a similar nature, like Right to Buy, have had various negative externalities in, for example, depleting pools of social housing without apt replenishment, which in the long term has contributed towards the UK's homelessness crisis. So we've tried as much as possible to ensure that people will not be displaced with this scheme so that housing is kept within the community, but we do also recognise that we're not experts. Now, what is the home ownership scheme? So we propose that Algebra work directly with racialised groups to renovate, mortgage and sell affordable, sustainable housing to these racialised groups, particularly Bangladeshi, Black African and Black Caribbean groups, who not only disproportionately own little wealth, but are among the least likely to be homeowners in the UK. Tying in with the awareness campaign, if we can get the government to acknowledge the racialised wealth gap, Algebra could lobby the government to subsidise this housing and make it more affordable, as well as potentially tying in with the Help to Buy campaign for new homes, getting these renovations perhaps categorised as something like newly sustainable or newly inhabitable properties. Alongside this, Algebra can offer free global money transfer services, allowing the abandonment of traditional westernised economic views of anti-globalisation circular economy models, and allowing migrant communities to establish their own cross-border economies. In this way, the housing scheme can also act as a catalyst for Algebra to create its own new circular economies within the bank, investing in and working with local communities to ensure that their own money stays within the community to build communal wealth, allowing in the long run for minority groups to build themselves to the level of wealth that white Brits can claim as a whole today.
So now I'm going to lead you through the process of how we decided on our specific course of action. When we chose housing, there were a number of different avenues down which we could potentially take our solution. Ultimately, we decided on what we thought was within the control of the bank. So the bank's policies, how it can leverage its capital and its partnerships. Our motivation to address the housing gap after encountering the statistics displayed on this slide, showing a number of racialized groups that hold far less property than their white counterparts. So first we came up with the bank building homes themselves to mortgage out to customers. But after talking to a property expert, we were told that this might be an unappealing managerial and logistical challenge. So this and the availability of land and to some sustainability considerations is what led us to our renovation solution. However, there is an issue of racialized credit discrimination, which means that some ethnic groups are disproportionately more likely to be rejected from a mortgage. We try to address this in two ways, which is one, avoiding algorithmic bias and improving sustainable substantive factors when deciding on a mortgage. So first, with algorithmic bias, there's a large volume of research in identifying and mitigating this, more than I can go into here. We recommend that Algebra pays especially close attention to this research when designing its loan decision algorithms, and especially when using historical data to test and train its models. Secondly, we propose a sort of road to home ownership program offered to customers who have been rejected from a mortgage or would like a more favorable rate. We focus more on our renovation solution, but you can see on the slide a few recommendations of what this process could entail. So like the credit improvement partners and financial literacy support. Now on to Louis to explain the specifics of our renovation solution.
Thank you, Corey. So the following slide illustrates the proposed programme in detail. Algebra should seek out a double income, no kids yet client base. This demographic requires a single bedroom dwelling that features little to no garden. To fit the £250,000 to £300,000 price bracket, these houses need to be outside of London in locations such as Watford, Slough or Croydon, locations that offer direct transport links to the working world in and around London. These houses are ideally Victorian stock, which due to their old-fashioned technology require modern renovations. Depending on the sophistication of the mortgage product, the house is then renovated by a development company owned by members of racialised groups with environmentally and economically friendly technologies. This programme's outcome equips the client with a high in demand asset. It mounts them upon the coveted property ladder. Now, although property is not a liquid asset, it remains one of the most stable investments, even during tough recessions like we've seen recently. Ultimately, our response directly answers the mission statement. As for the people, circular economies empower the various ethnic minorities involved through increased collaboration. As for the profits, every party involved in this process attains sizable profits, either through interest rates, renovation contracts, or asset acquisitions. As for the planet, the houses become more environmentally friendly due to their improved energy-saving technology. So, as a whole, these are the two approaches: the short-term awareness campaign and the long-term home ownership programme. On behalf of Carbon, I would like to thank you for taking time to listen to our propositions. We will now welcome any of your questions to clarify anything regarding our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you all. You can see Mattia's silent clapping. Really well done. And yeah, if you bring down the screen, we'll head straight to some questions. And yeah, I will encourage anyone watching from the external audience to fill in the feedback form if you're not coming in with a question. Carl, yeah.
Unless Nizam wants to go, obviously it'd be better if Nizam went. If he's
no, Carl, after you, please.
Yeah, it's a tough question, but I'm afraid, but about the kind of categories of racialization. I noticed white other in the middle there of the various other non-white racialized groups, and I just wonder how that plays out in reality. How does one make that distinction and work with that category in this context?
I don't mind just I don't have the whole answer, but I know that the statistics we use were largely from ONS, so we use their categorizations. So we need to put a little bit more research into figuring out how exactly they did that. I know, interestingly, when we were looking at the data, white Irish were disproportionately affected in a number of ways. We didn't look into that much, but I think that's probably why the white other is so present in those graphs.
Well, it could be Eastern Europeans, I guess, as well now, recent migrants from other parts of Europe. Yeah, sorry, Claire's got her hand up.
Hi, I might be about to reveal my complete ignorance about house building here, but I just wondered why you went for kind of one-bed Victorian properties as the kind of property proposition, rather than maybe a more purpose-built solution where you could generate some kind of economic benefit in the construction industry and developing skills and things for local people that way as well.
Yes, well, we did consider the different types of housings, the locations especially, because there's lots to consider there. But Victorian stock, I mean, first of all, it's far in the majority popularity-wise in the UK. I believe it's in the region of 70 to 80%. It's phenomenal. These houses often require renovation due to their archaic technology originally. So there is that demand instantly for renovations. I personally spoke to both a project manager and a chartered surveyor, actually just to check over exactly the locations that we proposed and all sorts of things. But yes, they proposed that they agreed that actually building new properties, I mean, we're also talking about in and around London, not in London because we're talking at 500 plus grand in zones 4 and 5 even. But unfortunately, I don't think that was actually an option. So in locations like Slough, Watford, Croydon, those seem to be the most appropriate selections.
Thank you.
If I can just jump in at the end there as well. So we were actually initially looking at building and building for purpose use. So looking at like different buildings for communities with families or like high elderly populations and things like that. Unfortunately, the land availability, particularly around London, was just looking far too expensive for it to be affordable. But obviously that's something to look into in the future. And the reason we have picked London and surrounding areas is because some statistics, I believe it was Corey found, or it was either Corey or Alex, sorry, were saying that over 70% of the BAME populations were concentrated in London in like relation to other areas of the UK and relation to population. So do you want to hop in on that, whoever it was?
I think the stat was the AME composition of London is 35% compared to a 17% national average. So London seemed like a good place to start without having to cast too wide a net, I think was the idea.
Fantastic. Nizam, we'll come to you and then Wakas.
Is Wakas on the call? Amazing. Don't see. Firstly, thank you for the presentation. Really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the. I actually really enjoyed both the outputs that you came with, but also the considerations which didn't appear. So I think the acknowledgement of things like lived experience, the acknowledgement of other things which are so interrelated is incredibly important. I think these things often get missed out, and so really, really note that. Question. I have a few questions, but I want to ask one around the short-term solution, which I think is a really important solution. Primarily, so there's two parts to this question. One, who were your primary audience for said campaign? Who is it that you wanted to know that this was an issue? And then two, did you feel or did you factor in that by having a campaign like that, what are the consequences unintentional also around maybe if you're from a racialized community and you look at that, it could have a negative effect also. Is that something that you guys considered?
I'm happy to take the second part of that one. Yeah, we had a long conversation when we were doing a mock-up and we almost considered like not putting any stats in because we realized that like you can so quickly inflame racial tensions like without meaning to, without coming down hard on one side. So yeah, we definitely really considered that. And I think the ones we picked in the end were we thought were the best fitting, but we definitely knew that'd be a problem. In terms of who we were targeting, I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything. I think we honestly didn't get much further than just like the general public, which is obviously not that specific, but generally countrywide, like polling this, I don't think many people are actually would be able to tell you what it is. But I can see Louis and Corey want to hop in, so go for it.
Louis, do you want to go first?
Fabulous, thank you. So just to say in terms of the languages listed, that was in accordance with the most common languages in London. And in terms of, it's a very good point, and especially through, let's say there's a big problem with art in terms of subjectivity, without having some kind of disclaimer almost, or an agenda that's being pushed with this data, it can spiral out of control and people get different opinions and adverse and misinterpretations. So what we try to do, especially with in both, it's more evident in the pink background one, is that we have the data, but then an agenda below the data saying, let's stop this. In a way, we want to push a certain idea, not into a sort of crazy propaganda level, but we thought it was important to have that disclaimer. Anything you'd like to say, Corey? Sorry.
I mean, yeah, I haven't got too much to add, just that we did, yeah, as Eva kind of said, we acknowledge this is a very sensitive kind of area, and it's our designs, I don't think I would be happy to put up. These are just propositions for people of probably the groups that are affected most to make themselves, just to make sure that because, you know, none of us are any part of any of these groups, so we're not sure what will not offend, but yeah, get what I'm going for.
Great. And do you mind if I ask one more question? And I might come back, but I think I really I think it's really important the role of ownership of homes in terms of wealth in the country. So I think you guys really picked a good issue there, and so I think that's important. I think the solution is very creative. I think practically there are things which I'm sure we could nitpick and go into detail around, like a financial institution, how it would work. But I really want to focus on the credits, because I think actually it's such an important point what you've described. Did you delve into that a bit deeper around why particular communities the credit process or the credit rating may work against them? Did you guys really delve deeper into that? Because it's racialized often, but actually it's actually more to do with the nature of I can go into examples. I don't want to answer my own question, but did you? I'd love to get a sense from you what you found out about that process and how you feel this could feed into this.
Yeah, so I'm happy to take this one initially. We didn't look that deeply into it, I'll be honest, but from what we did look and find out is particularly it disadvantages new immigrants to the UK, in that a lot of data is based off of having like stable housing, but also if you're new to London in particular, trying to find affordable housing will often come in areas with low credit scores in general, and that can have a massive impact, as well as like place of employment, previous credit scores, historical like family credit scores and things like that, all of which are out of someone's control, but because of historic discrimination against like racialized groups is much likely to be lower than that of someone from a white British background, no matter what class or anything they're coming from, which is another reason we were trying to distinguish and push the racialised wealth gap acknowledgement, because at the moment, I'm sure you're aware, the government are putting a lot more down to class, which we're trying to distinguish from. But yeah, if anyone else wants to jump in with that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, while we were doing our research, I found a paper, you probably have seen it. It's 2013, so it's not that recent, by St Andrews on credit, consumer credit discrimination, and it was quite long. So I thought that's in this kind of sprint format that we're using to create this presentation. I didn't think we could really go into enough depth to do it justice. So that's why we concentrated more on kind of the renovation. But I think the idea of the algorithms and all of the details involved in that mortgage decision process are really interesting and would be really good to explore.
I'll mention one thing just so that as a point of information. So one of the biggest issues around credit rating is actually there's a basket of goods, or it's less goods, it's more around processes that get wrapped up into what becomes credit rating. And the reality for people who are not in, say, stable income, they may have jobs which pay differently. It could even be freelancers, actually. There are certain things, for example, paying your utility bill on time over a 2-year period doesn't count for your credit rating when it could. So there are proxies that can be used to make it more accessible for a whole bunch of people. And then the racialized bit comes after that, because amongst that people happens to be lots of people from racialized minorities, and so just something for you guys to consider, because now we have an advent of open banking technology, which is completely allowing a new way of looking at it. So these algorithms are coming into play using new tech, so it's actually a very exciting time.
And I really hope that at least one of you will be taking this forward in your Term 3 project. I would love to see how you develop that. There is time this year, or it could be a Year 3 project. But yeah, it'd be really exciting to see how that developed. Well, Cass, I'm so sorry. We're going to have to move on to gold, but please do put your question in the chat if you like, and the group will respond there. But gold, if you want to start lining yourselves up, and yeah, really well done to Carbon.